You mentioned that our reality is limited to a certain rule set as well as the larger consciousness system. As far as our reality and the larger consciousness system, how are these rule sets created? Is it based on belief or experience? Also, is it possible for these rule sets to change once a certain number of people believe one thing? Could we begin to defy everyday laws of physics?
Yes, I've mentioned the word rule set before, and in an earlier question. So let me tell you a little about what this rule set is and what it comes from. Imagine a simulation of the Big Bang. Okay, everybody knows what the Big Bang is. So we're going to simulate the Big Bang, and we in our computers, the physicists who are cosmologists, they do things like this. But we're going to have this computer. We're going to come up with some initial conditions. We're going to have a lot of energy in a very tight spot, all in a very, very small volume, lots of pressure, lots of temperature. And then when we hit the run button, the simulation is going to let this ball of energy do whatever it does according to the rule set. Now, we're going to have a rule set, and of course it'll have things like all the electromagnetics and gravity and all the physics and chemistry and all the facts we know of how it works. So you start with initial conditions. You start with a rule set that says how do things interact and exchange energy. You punch the run button and you let it go. You let it evolve. Well, what happens is that tight bunch of hot plasma expands, and as it expands, it cools, and as it cools, matter coalesces, and you end up with suns, and then you end up with planets, and so on. That's the kind of the cosmology of the Big Bang. But now we're doing this in a simulation. So we'll call this the Big Digital Bang. So you see now what the rule sets are. The rule set are all the rules that enable this simulation of the Big Digital Bang to work, to be stable. If you didn't have the right initial conditions, you didn't have the right rule set, it wouldn't be stable. It would not coalesce. It would not create an interesting result. Matter of fact, some of those constants need to be so precise that even if you changed them only by a few percent, you would lose stability, and you wouldn't have a stable simulation. So that basically is what sets the basis of our universe. We have a Big Digital Bang, a virtual reality. So you started with the rule set, you started with the initial conditions, you let it run, and that is where we live. That produces the set for us to live in. Just like in the World of Warcraft, there's a set that that the action takes place in. There are certain mountains, certain buildings, certain trees, certain critters at certain places. This is the set created by the computer. Well, our set was not programmed. Our set evolved through the Big Digital Bang. You said, are these rule sets based on common belief? No, these rule sets are not based on common belief. The rule set's the rule set. It's the conditions of energy exchange, basically, and the initial conditions that enable this Big Digital Bang to produce a stable reality frame. Is it possible for the rule set to change, once a certain number of people believe things? Well, I think you're working on something else there, and we'll get back to that. Let's say, can we defy the laws of Newtonian physics? How locked in are we to this rule set? Okay, well, lots of things fall outside the laws of Newtonian physics. Quantum mechanics, relativity, Darwin's theory of evolution, all fall outside of Newtonian physics. Reality is probabilistic and statistical. Okay, probability and statistics allow for very unusual things to happen occasionally. Right? If you have a statistical distribution, there's something out there on the far tail of that probability distribution. It may only be 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million, but it's possible. And if you have an event that has a billion instances, then 1 in 10 million is going to pop up quite a bit. You see, you're going to pop up 100,000 times or so, that 1 in 10 million, if we're talking about billions of events. So probability and statistics allow for very unusual things to happen occasionally. there's also a psi uncertainty principle, okay, and that's more company policy, let me say, company policy rather than a fixed part of the rule set. It's there for a reason. Let me explain that. One way to explain the psi uncertainty principle is that there must be plausible deniability or sufficient uncertainty to mask any flagrant violation of objective causality. In other words, again, we're back to this rule that we need consistency in this virtual reality. So we can't have these occasional strange things that can happen statistically happening all the time. What that means is that one can only modify reality within the natural uncertainty of the event. All events have a certain amount of uncertainty. Anything that happens, unless it's a trivial thing, there's different ways that it can come out. Different things can happen. And that's true of even the most, you think something like a brick is certain. You have a brick, it weighs a certain amount, it's a certain length, it has a certain volume, certain density. You can measure these things, but there's error. You can't really measure these things precisely. There's always error. There's error in the measurement equipment, and there's error in, say, how long the brick is, what its weight is. It changes from instant to instant. The edges of the brick that you have to define to see how long it is are really molecules, and these molecules are in motion. So the edges aren't even still. They're bouncing around. And it isn't a flat side end of that brick. That brick has all kinds of bumps and valleys and creases. And, how do you define how long it is? So you have all these problems. Well, scientists will say that, they measure it plus or minus a certain amount. In other words, they get an average of all their measurements. They take 100 measurements. They're all different in the 8th decimal place, so they average all those together and say that's its size. That's statistics. Okay, that's probability. If you pick up another brick, what's the probability that it came out of the same mold that it'll be the same size? Well, of course it won't be the same size exactly, because exactly is a statistical probabilistic event. Okay, so everything has some natural uncertainty involved with it. Well, the psi uncertainty principle says we can only modify reality within the natural uncertainty of the event, and that is what creates the plausible deniability or sufficient uncertainty that masks any flagrant violation of objective causality. We like this idea of objective causality in our reality frame because it's a button-down environment that you can depend on. And if we're here in this learning school, which is what our reality, that's what the big digital bang created, was a school, a learning lab for evolving consciousness, then you want a button-down causal reality in order to learn in. You have feedback. You don't want kind of a wild funhouse sort of reality frame. That makes it very difficult to get good feedback and to learn in. So based on a requirement for the virtual reality to be consistent and maintain an effective learning environment, we have this psi uncertainty principle. Okay, as quality of consciousness improves, general average quality of consciousness, say, on this planet improves, the psi uncertainty principle may loosen up a bit. It may not have to be as tight. We may be able to live in a stranger, a little less buttoned down reality frame, because we will have a little bigger image, a little bigger picture and understanding of how reality works. So your last part that says, could we begin to defy the laws of Newtonian physics? Yes, that, like I say, that PUP being the psi uncertainty principle, PUP, that is not a rule set law. It's it's more like a company policy. It's imposed just as much as we need it to create a good learning lab. So those last two questions, is it possible for the rule set to change once a certain number of people believe one thing? No, the rule set isn't going to change. That's our basic reality. Although I suspect certain things could change within that rule set, such as the psi uncertainty principle could be less restrictive as we as a people grow up.